On a more specific level, you could be focusing in on training. You could develop trainings, you can implement them, you can be writing guides for different
Okay.
businesses or schools. You could be an e-learning developer, which is my favorite part of the job. I've worked on assessment and survey, like assist with creating better questions for the survey at the end of the
Okay.
day. I also just do a lot of researching. So there's different trends happening in education and technology, and I just have to constantly stay on top of that.
Today, I will be interviewing Erik Popil, and we're going to talk about what it's like to work as an instructional designer. So, Erik, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, let's go ahead and get started here at Job Dictionary. We like starting off with three kind of rapid fire questions. So, Erik, in your own words, what do you do? Where do you live? And as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
All right. So what I do is I design e-learning modules. That's my favorite part of the job. And then in a nutshell, I would say I also help instructors learn how to teach better. I've been
Okay.
working on that one sentence for a while now. I used to live in Queens, New York, but now I just recently moved to Long Island, New York.
Okay.
And as a kid, I always wanted to be a video game designer.
Oh, wow. And so, when did that switch?
It switched probably around when I got to college.
Okay.
And it was such a complicated industry to figure out. And
Okay.
I tried to get into programming because I was like, I don't feel like I have a good artistic talent to be on
Okay.
that side of things. So I was like, ooh, I can be a programmer and program video games. And that was too complicated for me. So I just had to switch tracks.
Interesting. And so now, how long have you been working as an instructional designer, and how did you get your start in the field?
Sure. So overall, I work at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I've been there for 12 years, but
Okay.
specifically as an instructional designer, I've been there for 9 years.
Yeah.
And now I'm a senior instructional designer.
Yeah.
Um, but I started my career, so that 9 years ago. Before that, I was heavily into IT.
Okay.
I was an IT admin for our learning management system where our students go online to take their courses. And I started meeting with my boss at the time. His name was John Graves.
Okay.
And I think he did a good job because he sat me down and the IT industry, especially because I'm in a medical school, can
Yeah.
be really stressful. Everybody, expects things to be done
Yeah.
really quickly.
Yeah.
There's all these fires that I have to constantly put out. And he sat me down. He's like, okay, well, what do you want to do moving forward for your career path? Like, do you want to keep doing this? Do you want to go somewhere else? And at the time, our whole team was shifting and changing too, and trying to
Okay.
be more educational focused and,
Okay.
help our faculty out. So we already had an idea of, this field called instructional design. And he actually opened up like a job search website and he's like, here, look at all these different instructional design positions and like what they do. And I was like, yeah, actually, I am pretty interested in that. We also had another instructional designer on our team at the time, so I was
Okay.
kind of under her wing. And slowly but surely, I like built up towards that. And then finally, one day I asked, I said, hey, so can I become an instructional designer? I want to actually officially be that. And they're like, how about you think about getting your master's degree? So I was like, oh, like, all right, fine. Like I didn't really plan on doing that, but if that will help. So as I was getting my master's in instructional design, in the middle of that, I got promoted to instructional designer. So I actually got to
Okay.
work as an instructional designer and start to finish up my master's degree.
Okay. And what are some niches that someone can choose to specialize in as an instructional designer?
So I think there really are a lot, and
Okay.
it's really, you choose what you're good at and what you're interested in. But on a broad scale, I'd say pretty much any business could potentially be looking for an instructional designer. And
Okay.
then aside from businesses, there's like, higher ed, which is what I'm in, undergraduate, K through 12, all those
Okay.
fields will be looking for instructional designers. And then on a more specific level, you could be focusing in on training. You could develop trainings, you can implement them, you can be writing guides for different
Okay.
businesses or schools. You could be an e-learning developer, which is my favorite part of the job. That's, designing interactive, clickable things. Um,
Okay.
you could be doing course creation completely from scratch, creating a course from ground
Wow.
up. And then in businesses, there's a lot of businesses that look for like a needs analysis. So they'll hire you as an instructional designer and say, okay, like for example, we have our help desk. Everybody's complaining they're not doing a good job. Like what's
Okay.
going wrong? So you could go in, perform a needs analysis, and fill in that gap, that need of like, okay, what's missing? How can we improve this to make business run better?
Yeah, that's so interesting. So now going specifically into your daily work and your tasks, what's your schedule like? What do you spend the majority of your day doing?
Sure. So I
Mhm.
guess I'm like a 9 to 5
Okay.
worker. My tasks are constantly in flux. I'd say if you've heard of like, the position that wears many hats, I feel like
Yeah.
instructional designers can do that. So I could be giving advice on different tools that our faculty could be using. For example, I could say like, oh, have you thought about using this video software to create video for your courses? Or have you done polling? Have you polled your
Mm,
students? And here's some apps that could do that. I've said this already. I built e-learning modules.
yeah.
I try to make mine very fun and interactive. You can also think of an e-learning module as like if you do like compliance training, some of them have found to be very boring. Try to make mine not be that. I redesign PowerPoints. So our PowerPoints are like lectures for students. I've done video creation and editing. I've worked on assessment and survey, like assist with creating better questions for the survey at the end of the
Okay.
day. And I also just do a lot of researching. So there's different trends happening in education and technology, and I just have to constantly stay on top of that.
Yeah. And so now with your 9 to 5 schedule, are you able to work remotely or hybridly, or do you have to be in the office every day?
Yeah, so actually, I personally work hybrid,
Okay.
but my position can be 100% remote. That's just not
Okay.
what, our upper administration
Yeah.
wants.
And so now what topics does someone have to be interested in order to be a really good instructional designer?
For topics, I would say, teaching and learning is a big one.
Okay.
Even if you're doing just training instead of working at a school, either way, you're teaching some sort of audience, and that audience
Yeah.
is learning in some way. So that's the broad one. I like to say a lot of my work is like, how do you take this complex topic and simplify it and shorten it and make it
Okay.
easier for your learners to understand?
Okay.
And then also, now AI is such a hot topic. That's
Hmm.
like nonstop. Everybody just keeps talking about how we
Yeah.
can utilize that.
Yeah.
Before it was like MOOCs, those were massive online open courses. If you know, like Coursera.com, that's a MOOC. We used to get into that, and we still build MOOCs to this day. And also like VR and AR, that was also a really hot topic before. It's died down a
Yeah.
little bit, but we're still definitely talking about it and seeing how that could be used in the classroom as well.
Cool.
And then in general too is like just, general design. Like if I make an
Yeah.
e-learning module, how can this be designed better? There's also like what accommodations can we think of? Like there's ADA compliance to worry about and like
Yeah.
students with different disabilities.
Hmm.
Um, and even like sometimes copyright infringement comes up. It's not as much of a worry if you're doing like if you're in a school and teaching and learning, but probably other businesses have to worry about like if you're grabbing images and other content from other
Yeah.
areas, you might not be able to use that.
Yeah. And so now just out of curiosity, do you ever experience like, I guess, designer's block, or how do you get inspiration?
Yeah, that could definitely happen. And there's a lot of work between the faculty of like creating a draft of a module and being like, okay, is this what you envisioned? And sometimes they'll be like, oh, not really. And then you can
Mm.
kind of shift it, change it. And I'm lucky to I love my coworkers. We're a pretty small team. There's just like 5 of
Okay.
us. So I
Wow.
usually then would go to them and like brainstorm together if I have that
Okay.
block and be like, how else can
Yeah.
I improve this?
Cool. And so now building off of that and going into specific skills and knowledge, are certain degrees really required to get this job? I know we talked about getting a master's, but other than that,
Right, that's a good question. I'd say yes and no. I feel like if you really have the experience, a good example would be like teachers. If you've already been teaching for a long period of time, there are teachers that also become instructional designers, and they
okay,
can do that in unison.
okay,
So I feel like, you don't have to get another degree if you've already been teaching for so long,
yeah,
but it could certainly help. And then there's also a whole part of the industry I didn't talk about, which is just freelancing. You could also become a
oh,
freelancer. You don't have to work as
okay,
part of a company.
yeah,
So I don't know if people who are looking for freelancers kind of like how deeply are they looking for a degree versus their experience and what they have on their
yeah,
resume.
yeah, that's completely true. And so now, what are some tools, technologies, or softwares that you use on a daily as part of your job?
Yeah, so there's a lot. I'd
Mm,
say the top ones, especially for e-learning creation, there's Adobe Captivate, which is a big
okay,
one, and Articulate 360, which has a separate product because it's part of a suite called Storyline. So
okay,
that helps me design these e-learning modules. You don't need to know any programming. There's a lot of drag and drop and stuff like
yeah,
that. Optionally, you Photoshop and Illustrator is very
okay,
can be very important. I've started my career for many years not using that and just like using
okay.
like Microsoft Paint sometimes. But that can certainly enhance what you're creating. And
Yeah,
then there's, just a series of other things. Like personally, we use something like Poll Everywhere
okay,
to create multiple choice questions that students can whip out their phones
yeah,
and answer that way. We use Zoom in our classrooms sometimes. For video stuff, I love a program called Camtasia. That's
oh,
really user friendly and simple to use. But then other people can be more complex and use something like Premiere Pro or Final Cut
okay,
Pro.
okay,
And then there's also like, what larger programs are you using? For example, we were using Blackboard for our student learning management system, and you
okay,
might have to know how that works if you're also helping your faculty and stuff like that.
yeah.
And there's also things like, the whole Google suite I love, Google
Mhm.
Forms, Docs. I really use that a lot for different interactive things.
Wow, there's so many. Yeah. So how do you stay updated with the development of your field?
So staying updated, there's, for example, conferences. I literally just went to one. It was either last week or 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
It was called Northeast Group of Educational Affairs. So that could
Okay.
be really helpful to see what other schools, other institutions, other businesses are doing versus what you're doing.
Yeah.
There's one that I really loved that I went to a couple years back to called Serious Play. And the whole thing behind that one was using games and gamification to teach. And I just really love that because you can make things more fun. And they cover things like using board games, using video games, or just using elements of games
Okay.
within your lecture.
Cool.
Um, yeah, it was really cool. So aside from conferences like webinars and workshops, just in general, staying on top of books, or signing up with newsletters. For example, I'm on something called eLearning Weekly or Inside Higher
Okay.
Ed. And then also, I think just really important, this is the best way I can learn, is just playing around with apps. And
Okay.
a lot of apps have free trials, so you can download it, try it out,
Mm.
and see, oh yeah, I could use this as part of my teaching and learning or whatever. And then the last one, which I'm really bad at, and I keep telling myself I need to do, is like joining an online community or a forum. And I'm sure
Okay.
that's like a really nice way to connect.
Even like on LinkedIn, there's a lot of people that just post their work, so it's interesting to look at. So now the conferences, would you say that they're optional? It's something that you choose to go to, or does your company make them mandatory?
It's optional, but encouraged. So,
Okay.
it's also a source of like, showing that you want to grow and develop in your career.
Yeah.
And when you do make these networking, meeting other people, like reporting back to
Hmm.
your business or your institution and saying, what else is going on, what's new that you've discovered, and what can we use moving forward.
Yeah. next set of questions are just going to talk about your personal perspective. So, as an instructional designer, what parts of your job are the most exciting or the most interesting?
I'd say starting out with helping others, I
Mm,
had that like need and desire even before when I was in IT, helping people with their issues. That was
yeah,
always something I really wanted to do. It's just you're helping others. And I feel like you kind of have to have that in instructional design too, with a bit of patience as well, because sometimes, you could be talking to someone that's been teaching for 20 years and they'll be like, why am I taking advice from you?
yeah,
But once you get that connection, it's really rewarding.
yeah.
And I'd also say like just being very creative. I've always been very creative outside of my work as well. And just like implementing that, especially like in my e-learning modules and trying to gamify something. I love being able to think up of creative ways to teach
Yeah.
somebody something. Yeah.
So now on the flip side, what parts are harder, emotionally challenging, or just maybe not as fun?
I'd say for challenging, like the how do you say, I can't pronounce
Bureau
bureaucracy.
bureaucracy.
Just like upper administration, different
Okay.
rules and policies that are
Yeah.
placed where you might be wanting to develop a program or something, but it's like, oh, no, they're not interested, or they're saying, oh, there's not enough time, or I'm
Mhm.
not having the best examples right now, but just like the roadblocks that come in your
Yeah.
way, like stop you from doing what is needed.
Yeah.
And also, just personally in my line of work, because again, we are a medical school, just
Okay.
different stressors that come from that. And like, our faculty are actually doctors. So their priority is, just looking after
Patience.
patients.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, they don't always have a lot of time. So that could be stressful. And
Okay.
also just like sometimes this could probably be more aligned with different businesses too, is like different VIPs that you get
Mm.
that have this super strict deadline where like normally you could, spend a little bit more time crafting your lesson or whatever it
Yeah.
is you need to craft. But it's like, oh no, we have a timeline. It's like, okay, you're not going to get as good of a product, but here we
Yeah.
are.
I was just gonna ask out of curiosity, how much freedom do you have within a product? Like say you come up with an idea and you want to share it, how much freedom do you have to actually do the idea that you have?
It can be mixed. I feel
Okay.
like I'm lucky enough where I have a lot of freedom to do different creative things that I want to
Okay.
do. And it's
Okay.
not as straightforward like a compliance module that's just like click, click, click. Okay, now you have to take a
Yeah.
test and that's it. But it also depends on I feel like the final say should still be the faculty, or sometimes we
Okay.
call them the content experts.
Okay.
Um, if I say, oh, I recommend you do this XYZ, and they say, oh, no, I don't want to do that, I'll just say, that's fine. This
Okay.
is really, your baby at the end of the
Yeah.
day, and I'm going to follow what you want to do, even though I'm saying I highly recommend
Yeah.
XYZ.
Yeah. And so now what do people underestimate about this profession?
For underestimating, I would say a good way, the only way I can describe it is just really just not really fully understanding what our field does in
Yeah.
general. So
Yeah.
every person I go to might have a different idea of what we do.
Okay.
And I mean, that's fair because our profession actually does have a wide range of things we can do.
Yeah.
But like, for example, sometimes people still come up to me and call me the Blackboard guy or the tech guru. And I'll have to
Okay.
be like, that's not the only thing I do. I can help
Yeah.
you with your course and your material
Yeah.
and blah, blah, blah.
So now on the flip side, what do people overestimate about it?
For overestimating, it's also, I think, back to not fully understanding what we do. And I've heard a lot of people latch on to the designer part of
Okay.
instructional design. And they
Okay.
think that, like, I design websites or do something really artistic, which is not what I do. And I actually feel like I need to enhance those skills of mine.
Okay. And so now kind of going back to your schedule and what that looks like, are you able to leave all your work at the office or after the 9 to 5, how much work do you bring home?
Yeah, personally, I can leave stuff at my office. Like at 5
Okay.
p.m., I'm usually good to go. I feel like um I put a lot of effort into finishing things early and
Okay.
making sure I can leave at 5 p.m. So I'm sure not everybody feels that they can do that. But
Yeah.
it also depends. I'm sorry for repeating it again, going back to
No worries.
medical school is
No
like
worries.
because a lot of our faculty slash doctors are so busy. Sometimes we're waiting on them to
Okay.
give material to us before I can do
Yeah.
any work. And it just becomes this last minute thing where like, oh, courses are starting in 2 weeks. I
Yeah.
finally just got this thing and now I have to spend a little bit more time past 5 p.m. And
Okay.
that's fine. It doesn't always happen.
Yeah. And so now with all of that, are there any busy seasons in the job? Which parts of the year are the busiest?
Believe it or not, this summertime
Okay.
is our busiest. So it's weird to think about because you kind of think of, oh, this is time to relax. And,
Yeah.
students are actually off from school, but this is when we're doing our most prep work and we're working with our faculty to do a lot of prep
Okay.
work and they finally have time to think of what they want to do and we're doing stuff with curriculum and
Yeah.
right now specifically this isn't a yearly thing but our institution actually are revamping their entire curriculum
Okay.
and so that's just going to be so much work
Yeah.
rethinking things.
Yeah. And so now kind of going into what the industry looks like, before we got on this call, I had to do some research on Google. And according to Google, the average salary for an instructional designer is about 70,000. From your experience, is this accurate? What do you think about that number?
That's an excellent question. So this is like this is part of the industry I'm really bad at, but
Okay.
I asked AI that same question,
Okay.
and I
Okay.
also got a number that was between like 70 to 87.
Yeah.
I would say that seems normal to me,
Okay.
but it's like it's gonna be different for everybody. I work for a
Yeah.
nonprofit, so I
Okay.
might be getting a lower salary.
Okay.
And there are freelancers that set their own prices, and then there's bigger companies that pay more. So that I think
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
there it
It's
seems right.
Yeah. And so now, what are some of the biggest employers of this industry? Basically, what companies look for instructional designers?
I think it's really a wide field, and a lot of companies do. So, like any business company, even surprisingly, when I was looking at different jobs, there was like people in finance looking for
Oh,
instructional
wow.
designers. And then again, grad school, undergrad, K through 12. And
Yeah.
I'll just throw like a couple of companies I remembered too, and I get these email pop-ups, right? And I saw like, oh, Nickelodeon's looking for one,
Wow.
Facebook, Google, and then like random things like CVS or Wegmans. Like, yeah.
Cool. Interesting. So now in your 9 years as being an instructional designer, how have you seen it change and how do you see it change in 5 to 10?
I mean, it really is constantly changing, especially with technology. I think AI is
Yeah.
going to be one of the bigger changes. And I mentioned before, like, oh, before it was VR, a lot of people are talking about that and MOOCs. But
Mhm.
now I keep seeing even applications. All right, you can get these apps now of AI programs that auto-generate e-learning modules for you. You can
Yeah.
put it in your learning management system and they auto-generate courses. And
Yeah.
for students, they auto-generate flashcards that they can use to study and multiple choice questions. So it will be interesting to see how that will change because students, I
Yeah.
think, are already using AI, but
Yeah.
faculty have not yet gotten on board with it or figured out
Mhm.
how to use it. And some
Yeah.
institutions are just like banning it completely too because they don't want
Yeah.
students to use it to cheat or something like that.
Yeah. Do you think it's important for faculty to maybe get on board with AI or use it as an advantage, as a tool?
I really do, and I've been to so many talks where that's why I feel like I can say it. It's just because I keep hearing other people say it. Is like, yeah, if you're not gonna get on board with this, you're gonna be left out,
Yeah.
and that might be the difference between like keeping your, I don't want to say keeping your job or not. That sounds very intense, but like I feel like you definitely will be left behind in one way or
Yeah.
the other.
Yeah. And so now we want to give our listeners some advice. So, Erik, what do you recommend that candidates that are interested in this job do to set themselves apart from others?
Sure. So again, not necessary, but if you do get a master's degree or certain certificates, I feel like it will set you apart from everybody else.
Okay.
Build up a nice portfolio. So for example, mine, because I built a lot of e-learning modules and different videos I've created, I have that on my portfolio as examples
Okay.
that different companies can look at. And also, I'd say learn all the lingo. So instructional design has its own like different terminology, and it sometimes cross references with teaching. Like teachers would know it, but even sometimes teachers don't know this. So I'll give
Yeah.
examples of like there are terms like pedagogy versus andragogy. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So that's just the learning, the theory of learning. It's the
Okay.
theory of learning, and pedagogy is the theory of learning for younger people.
Hmm.
Andragogy is for older adults. There's different learning theories. There's something called Bloom's taxonomy. So there's this
Oh.
guy, I forget his first name, who was part of some committee and they formed this taxonomy. There's this like list of verbiage, all these different
Wow.
verbs that you could utilize when you're making learning objectives for your
Okay.
course. So those are
Wow.
really important. And then
Hmm.
there's other things like scaffolding, and that's the theory behind like you start off your teaching or somebody's learning on an easy level, and slowly they progress and it gets
Hmm.
harder and harder so that
Yeah.
they can build their knowledge that way and even things like the cognitive load theory. So that's the theory of like, let's say you have a PowerPoint and there's like 1,000 words on the screen and three random images. Any person's brain, no matter who you are, will get overloaded with seeing
Yeah.
that. So you have to
Yeah.
simplify things.
Yeah. And so now going back to kind of the portfolio aspect, what do you suggest or recommend that a portfolio look like? Maybe just what are some things that if I wanted to go into instructional design, what should I focus on when I'm making a portfolio?
I'd say that's something I'm still figuring out,
Okay.
but for sure there are people that are going to be asking you for, I don't think everybody, but a lot of people might be asking you for examples of your
Okay.
work. So
Okay.
if you have examples on your portfolio, sometimes, you can probably get away with just having like a screenshot of your thing followed by different descriptions, why did you implement this during
Yeah.
for whatever reason, and how did it help? There's a lot of data you can gather. Like let's say you take a survey of different people and you say, oh yeah, we did collect a survey and it helped because of blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I don't think everybody will do this, but like I also link out my videos and e-learning modules where you can actually play it and interact with
Oh,
it live. So it's not
oh,
just
that's
text
cool.
on a screen.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. So now what are some books or resources or maybe even programs that you suggest our listeners look into?
So for a certification or a program, personally, I got mine as the Masters of Education in Instructional Design. There
Okay.
was another path that was Masters of Science in Instructional Design. And
Okay.
the only reason why I chose education was because I felt like I already have a strong science and tech background. I wanted people to see that I can do education as well.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then books too. There's this one I'm in the middle of called The Accidental Instructional Designer
Oh,
by
wow.
Cami Bean. So that
Okay.
is really good. And that,
Okay.
like, everything I'm reading and for every chapter is like, oh, I've been through this. And I also accidentally became an instructional designer. And it goes through a lot of helpful tips and tricks.
Okay.
And I'll just list two more, which I found from when I took my master's degree. So I must have kept them for some reason. I don't remember why. But one was called E-Learning and Science of Instruction by Ruth
Uh-huh.
Clark and Richard Mayer. And the other one's called Making Online Teaching Accessible by Norman Coombs.
Okay. Cool. And now, just again, out of curiosity, what's the difference between the Masters of Science and the Masters of Education?
I feel like education probably focuses more on um, how to develop and create a course from scratch, and also a lot more focused on learning theory, whereas maybe Masters of Science could focus more on the technology side. I could be
Okay.
completely wrong about that.
Okay. That's okay. Thank you. And so now, if you were able to talk to yourself when you were just beginning this career, what would you say?
I would say don't feel like an imposter, because
Okay.
I felt like because I did make this switch from technology admin to instructional designer, I always felt like I didn't actually belong there. And
Okay.
that when I was giving advice to faculty, I'd start thinking, well, why would they want to listen to what I'm
Oh,
saying if they have all this teaching experience and I
yeah.
just have theories that I've
Hmm.
learned.
Hmm.
But I think that has gotten much better. And I
Yeah.
still ask myself that question sometimes too. But it definitely gets better. So I'd tell
Yeah.
myself, just don't feel like that.
Yeah. And so finally, where can people reach out to you or maybe even follow along with your work?
Oh, sure. I think pretty much on LinkedIn, I'm just Erik Popil. I really should probably make like an Instagram or something where people could follow me, but I don't actually post my work anywhere else.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and we'll make sure to tag you on LinkedIn when that gets posted, when this podcast gets posted. But yeah, that's all we have for today. So thank you so much, Eric, for joining me and
Yeah,
just giving your insight on this field. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you, Miranda. I think this was awesome.
You just got one episode closer to learning about the world of jobs out there. To explore the rest of our career categories and find your best fit, go to jobdictionary.com to sign up for the beta users waitlist. Then subscribe here to find the next episodes coming out this week. And as always, drop us a comment, review, or message to let us know how we could better attune our episodes to your specific needs. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, Threads, Pinterest, and wherever else you're on socials to go get our short, snappy preview reels that expose you to new job options every day. Because here at Job Dictionary, we believe your big aha moment can be just one scroll away. Go check it out and get out there. Cheers!